Heartbreak doesn't just shatter your soul, it empties your bank account right along with it. Picture a woman sitting alone in a dim Chicago lounge clutching a glass of cheap bourbon, trying desperately to drown out the wreckage of her own life. Broke, plus size, completely alone. Or so she thought. Because up in the VIP booth, hidden in velvet shadows, one of the most ruthless syndicate bosses in the city was watching her every single move, mesmerized. Her nightmare was about to end. But a far more dangerous game was just getting started. Rain lashed the tinted windows of the Onyx Room, a high-end speakeasy tucked away on Rush Street, mirroring the relentless storm inside Delia Hart. She sat hunched over the polished mahogany bar, her full, heavy figure poured into a dark green wrap dress that felt entirely too tight tonight. For the past 3 months, food had been her only comfort, adding an extra 20 pounds to her already plus-size frame, and she didn't care anymore. The soft curve of her stomach, the fullness of her thighs, they were just the physical armor she was building against a world that had chewed her up and spat her out. Delia stared into her glass of well whiskey, watching the ice melt into a pathetic little puddle. She was 28, a sharp auditor at a prestigious accounting firm, and yet she'd been foolish enough to let one man burn her entire life to the ground. Brandon Cole. Just thinking his name made her chest tighten with a suffocating mix of rage and shame. Brandon had been charming, handsome, and seemingly head over heels for her. He'd made her feel beautiful, constantly praising her lush curves, calling her a goddess when the rest of the world told her she was too much. And it was all a calculated lie. Once he had her completely under his spell, he'd talked her into co-signing a massive business loan for his so-called tech startup. He forged documents, drained her savings, maxed out 3 of her credit cards, and vanished into thin air. Now Delia was staring down the barrel of $150,000 in debt. The eviction notices from her landlord were piling up on her kitchen counter. Her life was an unmitigated disaster, and she had nobody to blame but herself. She took another burning sip, a rogue tear escaping her lashes and carving a track down her flushed, rounded cheek. She swiped it away angrily. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry tonight. Tonight was just for numbing the pain. High above the floor, behind a pane of one-way glass in the exclusive VIP section, Marco Ferraro sat in total silence. Marco was a ghost in the Chicago underworld, the undisputed head of the Ferraro crime syndicate. At 34, he carried a lethal kind of elegance, a sharp jaw, cold slate-gray eyes, and a tailored suit that concealed the violent reality of his daily life. The room around him hummed with his top lieutenants discussing union kickbacks and smuggling routes, but Marco wasn't hearing a word. His piercing gaze was locked onto the woman sitting alone at the bar below. "Boss, the shipment from Miami gets in Tuesday," his underboss, Enzo, muttered, tapping a cigar against a crystal ashtray. "If the feds are watching the docks, we might need to reroute." Marco raised a single finger. Enzo went silent instantly. Marco leaned forward, resting his forearms on the glass. He'd been watching the woman in the green dress for the better part of an hour. In a club packed with artificial, perfectly sculpted socialites, there was something arresting about her. She was undeniably full-figured, her gorgeous curves spilling softly against the bar stool, dark hair cascading in messy waves. But it wasn't just her body. It was her crushing, unmistakable sorrow. Marco lived in a world built on deception, where smiles were weapons and laughter was a negotiation tactic. The raw, unfiltered agony radiating off this woman was the most honest thing he'd seen in years. He watched her take another drink, her lips trembling before she squeezed her eyes shut. A strange, unfamiliar protectiveness flared in his chest. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But looking at her soft, vulnerable form, he felt an overwhelming urge to shield her from whatever was tearing her apart. "Who is she?" Marco asked, his voice a low rumble that commanded obedience. Enzo blinked, following his gaze. "Nobody I recognize, boss. Not a regular. Want security to run her ID." "No," Marco said softly, tracing the slope of her neck as she ordered another drink. Leave her alone. Just make sure nobody bothers her. He leaned back, swirling his glass. He should have been focused on the incoming shipment, on the millions moving through his territory. Instead, he was captivated by a stranger, watching her shoulders slump like she carried the whole city on her back. Marco had built his empire by exploiting weakness. But looking at her, all he wanted to do was heal hers. He just didn't realize yet that the universe had a dark sense of humor, and their lives were already tangled together in a web of stolen money and inevitable violence. Hours slipped by, and Delia's tab grew right alongside her numbness. The edges of the room blurred, the smooth jazz warping into a thrum in her ears. She knew she should go home to her half-packed apartment, but the thought of those cardboard boxes made her physically sick. Then the heavy scent of cheap cologne and stale beer invaded her space. A tall, aggressively confident man in an unbuttoned dress shirt slid onto the stool beside her, wearing the arrogant sneer of a mid-level corporate drone who thought bottle service made him a king. "A little late for a girl to be drinking all alone, isn't it?" he slurred, leaning in too close. Delia stiffened, pulling her coat tighter. "I prefer to be alone, actually. Have a good night." The man scoffed, his eyes sweeping over her body with blatant disgust mixed with predatory amusement. "Come on, sweetheart, don't play hard to get. Guys like me are doing girls like you a favor just saying hello. A big girl like you should be grateful for the attention." The cruel words hit Delia squarely in her deepest insecurities. Brandon's voice echoed in her head, telling her nobody else would ever want her, that she was too fat, too loud, too much. She stared at the bar, cheeks burning, wishing the floor would open and swallow her whole. Up in the VIP booth, Marco's blood ran ice cold. He didn't need to hear the words. He saw the way the man leaned over her, the smirk, the way Delia seemed to shrink into herself, trying to make her large body as small as possible. The protective instinct simmering inside him boiled over into lethal rage. "Boss?" Enzo asked nervously, noticing the shift in the room's temperature as Marco stood abruptly. Marco didn't answer. He adjusted his cuffs, his face an emotionless mask, and walked out the heavy oak doors. He descended the spiral staircase slowly, his presence parting the crowded floor like water. The locals who recognized the Ferraro boss quickly averted their eyes, holding their breath as the apex predator of Chicago stepped into their midst. At the bar, the drunk reached out and wrapped his hand forcefully around Delia's wrist. "I said, let me buy you a drink, chubby." "Let go of me," Delia whispered, her voice shaking. Before the man could respond, a large, impeccably manicured hand clamped down on his shoulder, the grip paralyzing, digging into his collarbone with bone-crushing force. "I believe the lady asked you to let go of her," a deep, chilling voice murmured. The drunk spun around, ready to swing, and the words died in his throat the moment he looked into Marco Ferraro's dead, slate-gray eyes. The aura of danger was suffocating. Marco didn't have to raise his voice. His suit, his height, and the two massive men who'd silently materialized behind him told the drunk exactly who he was dealing with. "I was just leaving," the man stammered, all color draining from his face. "You were," Marco agreed softly, releasing him. "If I ever see your face in this city again, I'll have my men break both your legs. Now walk!" The man stumbled backward, practically tripping over himself as he sprinted for the exit. Delia sat frozen, her heart hammering as she stared at the terrifying, ridiculously handsome stranger who'd just saved her. Marco turned his attention to her, the lethal coldness melting instantly into something warm, dark, and possessive. "Are you all right?" he asked, sliding onto the stool the drunk had vacated. Yes. Thank you," she stammered, pulling her wrist to her chest. She felt wildly out of place next to him. He looked like a billionaire, flawless and dangerous, while she was a heartbroken auditor with mascara running down her face. "You really didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Marco said simply. He signaled the bartender. "A glass of the 18-year for the lady," And some water. He looked back at her, his gaze sweeping over her face. I'm Marco. Delia, she whispered, mesmerized by the intensity of his stare. He wasn't looking at her the way men usually did, with pity or dismissal. He looked at her as if she were the only woman in the room. Why is a woman like you drinking well whiskey and crying alone on a Tuesday night, Delia? Marco asked gently. Maybe it was the alcohol, or the exhaustion of holding it in for months, but the dam broke. She found herself spilling everything, the dead-end pressure of her job, the crushing debt, her insecurities about her weight, the man who'd destroyed her. He took everything, she sobbed quietly, sipping the expensive scotch. He made me believe he loved me. He loved my body, my mind, but he just wanted my credit score. Now he's gone, and I'm drowning. Marco reached out, his warm thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The contact sent a jolt straight through her spine. What was his name? He asked quietly. Brandon, she choked out, staring at her lap. Brandon Cole. Marco's hand stilled on her cheek. The air vanished from his lungs. Brandon Cole. Marco knew exactly who that was. 3 weeks ago, Brandon Cole had borrowed $2 million from the Ferraro syndicate to fund a ghost tech company using falsified records. When the first payment came due, Brandon vanished. Marco had already put a hit out on him. Brandon Cole was a dead man walking. And now Marco looked at the soft, heartbroken woman beside him. She had no idea she was sitting next to the head of the Mafia. No idea her ex-boyfriend had stolen from the most dangerous man in the Midwest. The universe had just dropped Brandon Cole's biggest victim right into his lap. The perfect leverage. But looking at Delia's trembling lips and the vulnerable curve of her waist, Marco realized leverage was the last thing on his mind. He didn't want to use her to find Brandon. He wanted to protect her. And then he was going to make Brandon Cole suffer in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Silence stretched between them, heavy as Marco processed the name. The sheer audacity of the universe to drop this specific woman next to him at the exact moment his men were turning the city upside down, looking for that exact coward. His jaw tightened. The man who'd humiliated this beautiful, vulnerable woman was the same man who'd stolen $2 million from the Ferraro syndicate. A coincidence so astronomical it felt like divine intervention. Delia, Marco started, his voice a low, soothing rumble. I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going to pay a single dime of that debt. And Brandon Cole is never going to hurt you again. She let out a wet, bitter laugh, shaking her head. You're very sweet, Marco. Really. But you don't understand. The bank doesn't care about my broken heart. The contracts have my signature. It's my debt. My ruined life. I'm a man who solves problems for a living, Marco replied smoothly, leaning close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. I specialize in debt recovery. Consider it fate that I sat down next to you tonight. Delia really looked at him then. The custom suit that probably cost more than her car, the watch gleaming subtly in the dim light. He exuded wealth, power, and an unmistakable aura of danger. He didn't look like a financial consultant. He looked like a king who conquered nations. Why would you help me? She asked, her voice trembling. You don't know me. I'm a mess. I'm broke. I'm overweight and I cry in bars. Marco reached out, gently grasping her chin, tilting her face up. You are beautiful, he stated, with such absolute conviction there was no room to argue. Your curves are perfect. Your mind is clearly brilliant. Brandon Cole didn't leave because you weren't enough, Delia. He ran because he's a coward and a thief. And as for why I want to help you, let's just say I have a personal aversion to men who exploit innocent people. Before she could process the intensity of it, exhaustion crashed over her. The adrenaline, the whiskey, the emotional toll all catching up at once. She swayed on the stool, her vision blurring. Marco caught her effortlessly, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, easily supporting her weight. She felt soft and warm against him, fitting perfectly into his chest. Enzo! Marco snapped, the gentle tone gone, replaced by the icy command of a syndicate boss. His underboss materialized in seconds. Bring the car to the private exit. Now! He looked down at Delia, whose eyes were fluttering shut against his lapel. I'm getting you out of here. You're safe now. Within minutes, they were sliding into the cavernous back seat of a black armored Maybach, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. Delia was half asleep, nestled in the crook of Marco's arm. He held her with a fierce, possessive grip, his mind spinning with violent calculations. He couldn't take her back to her apartment. If Brandon was desperate, and stealing from the Mafia meant he was, he might crawl back to Delia to use her again. Marco would not let that happen. Where to, boss? The driver asked. The private residence, the penthouse, Marco commanded. Enzo turned, eyes wide. Boss, the penthouse? We haven't vetted her. She could be. She's exactly who she says she is, Enzo. Marco cut in, his voice a steel blade. I want a security detail on the floor 24 hours a day. Nobody in or out without my permission. And Enzo, pull everything we have on Brandon Cole's associates. His phone pings, his card transactions, all of it. He has 150,000 of her money and 2 million of mine. I want him found by tomorrow. Marco looked down at the sleeping woman in his arms, her full lips parted, her thighs resting heavily against his leg. For years he'd been consumed by the syndicate, the violence, the territory wars, the relentless pursuit of power. He'd built a fortress around his heart, letting no one in. And yet, in a matter of hours, this broken, full-figured auditor had bypassed every one of his defenses without even trying. He was going to get her money back. He was going to rebuild her shattered confidence. And then he was going to show her exactly what happened to monsters like Brandon Cole when they wandered into the territory of a bigger, darker predator. Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the sprawling penthouse in warm gold. Delia shifted on the massive bed, groaning as a headache throbbed behind her temples. The sheets were softer than anything she'd ever felt. She blinked awake, memory slowly reassembling the fragments of the night, the speakeasy, the drunk, Marco. The crushing realization that a gorgeous, powerful billionaire had carried her out of a bar and brought her here. She sat up, clutching the silk duvet, and found she was wearing one of Marco's oversized dress shirts, buttoned all the way up. He hadn't touched her. He'd just made sure she was safe. Good morning, a deep voice said from the doorway. She jumped. Marco leaned against the frame in dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, holding a silver tray with coffee and a glass of water with 2 aspirin. I shouldn't be here, Delia stammered, heat rushing to her cheeks, self-conscious of her messy hair, bare face, the bulk of her body under his shirt. I don't even know you. I let a total stranger bring me to his apartment. I'm an idiot. Marco walked over, setting the tray on the nightstand, his movements smooth, almost predatory. You aren't an idiot, Delia. You were exhausted, overwhelmed, vulnerable. I offered you a safe harbor and you took it. Drink the water. Take the pills. She obeyed, the coolness grounding her racing thoughts. Where are we? My home, Marco replied, sitting on the edge of the mattress, his gaze sweeping over her with a quiet, smoldering appreciation that made her toes curl. Your clothes are dry cleaned and hanging in the bathroom, but right now we need to talk about your situation. Delia sighed. My situation is that I'm bankrupt. I need to leave. I have to go beg the partners at work not to fire me. You aren't going to work today, Marco said calmly, and you aren't going back to your apartment. A spike of irritation cut through her anxiety. Excuse me, you don't get to tell me what to do. You bought me a drink. You didn't buy my life. Marco actually smiled, a dark, devastating smirk. I like your fire, but listen to me. Brandon Cole didn't just steal from you. He stole from some very dangerous people in this city. People who are looking for him right now. If they find out you co-signed his loans, they might come looking for you. Delia's blood ran cold. Dangerous people? Like loan sharks? Something like that. Marco lied smoothly, though the truth was far worse. I run a firm that tracks down missing assets. I've been looking for Brandon for 3 weeks. Finding you was luck, but it also puts you in the crosshairs. You need to stay here under my protection until I resolve this. Before she could process it, her phone buzzed aggressively on the nightstand. The screen lit up. Blocked caller ID. Delia froze, staring at it like a venomous snake. Marco's eyes narrowed. He picked it up, answered, and hit speaker, holding it between them. "Delia!" A panicked, breathless voice crackled through. She gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. It was Brandon. "Delia, baby, please tell me you're there," Brandon begged, his voice laced with terror. I messed up so badly, I need your help." Marco's expression turned to pure ice. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. "I know I took the money," Brandon continued frantically, completely unaware his worst nightmare was listening. "But I have a plan. I just need one last favor. Wire the remaining $20,000 from your retirement account to an offshore account. Do this, and I promise I'll come back and we'll run away together. They're going to kill me, Delia. The Ferraro family is going to kill me if I don't pay them back by tomorrow." Delia's heart stopped. The Ferraro family, even she had heard the whispers, the most ruthless Mafia family in Chicago. Brandon hadn't just taken a bad business loan. He'd stolen from the mob. "Delia, please," Brandon sobbed. "Meet me at the old warehouse in Cicero at midnight. Just bring the wire confirmation. You're the only one who can save me. I know you still love me." Marco ended the call with a sharp tap. The silence was deafening. Delia was trembling, tears of horror spilling. "He stole from the Mafia," she whispered. "He wants me to go to a warehouse. They'll kill me too." Marco set the phone down gently and reached out, cupping her soft cheeks, forcing her to meet his eyes. There was no fear in his gaze, only calm, terrifying certainty. "Nobody is going to kill you, Delia. Brandon made a fatal mistake calling you. He thought he could use your gentle heart one last time." "What are we going to do?" she cried, leaning into his touch despite her panic. Marco stood, adjusting his cuffs with chilling precision. "You are going to stay exactly where you are and eat breakfast. I'm going to take a drive to Cicero." He looked down at her, the mask of the benevolent businessman shattering to reveal the ruthless boss underneath. "I told you I'd fix your debt, Delia, and the Ferraro family always collects." Midnight blanketed the abandoned Cicero warehouse district in oppressive darkness, broken only by flickering streetlights. The biting wind off the lake rattled the loose metal siding of the decaying structures. Inside the largest warehouse, dust danced in the pale moonlight filtering through shattered skylights. Brandon Cole paced frantically across the empty concrete, his designer coat doing nothing against the shivering that racked his frame. He kept checking his cracked phone, desperate for a message from Delia. He'd played her perfectly for months, weaponizing her insecurities and her need for validation to drain her accounts. He was confident she'd show, blindly loyal and foolish enough to empty her retirement fund to save him. Headlights swept across the concrete outside. Brandon stopped, a relieved, arrogant smirk replacing his terror. He smoothed his hair, practicing the pathetic pleading expression that always worked on her. He expected Delia's dented old Honda. Instead, the heavy hum of a 12-cylinder engine vibrated through the floor. The rolling doors groaned upward, revealing the armor-plated silhouette of a black Maybach. Brandon's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold knot of dread. The back door clicked open, and a tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out. A man in a bespoke charcoal overcoat, radiating suffocating authority. Flanking him were 4 massive men, hands resting inside their jackets. Not Delia. Where's Delia?" Brandon stammered, trying to hold onto some bravado. "I told her to come alone. Who the hell are you?" Marco walked slowly into the warehouse, his footsteps echoing like a judge's gavel. He stopped 10 feet away, his slate-gray eyes sweeping over the trembling con artist with profound disgust. "Delia is currently sleeping in a silk bed overlooking Lake Michigan, completely safe from parasites like you," Marco said, his voice a low, lethal purr. "She won't be coming tonight, Brandon, or ever again." Brandon swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the exits, only to find Enzo and 3 enforcers blocking every route. "I don't know what she told you, man, but this is a misunderstanding. We have a financial arrangement." "Oh, I'm fully aware of your financial arrangements," Marco replied, pulling black leather gloves onto his hands. "I know about the forged documents, the maxed-out cards. I know you left a sweet, vulnerable woman with 150,000 of your debt while you ran off with money that wasn't yours." "She signed those papers willingly," Brandon shouted, panic elevating his pitch. "She's a fat, desperate auditor who was just thrilled a guy like me gave her the time of day. She knew what she was doing." He trailed off, finally looking closely at the man before him. The icy gray eyes, the aristocratic jaw, the terrifying stillness. The whispers of the underworld slammed into him. "You!" Brandon choked out, all the blood draining from his face. "You're Marco Ferraro. And you are $2 million in debt to my family," Marco confirmed softly, stepping closer. "You stole from my syndicate, and then, in a display of spectacular stupidity, you stole from a woman I've decided belongs under my protection. You made her cry. You made her feel worthless. I take very personal offense to both." "Please," Brandon begged, dropping to his knees on the filthy concrete, tears streaming. "Please, Mr. Ferraro. I have the money. I hid it offshore. I can wire it all back right now. Just let me live." Marco stared down at him, devoid of mercy. He snapped his fingers. Enzo stepped forward with a sleek laptop and shoved it into Brandon's trembling hands. "Log in," Marco commanded. "First you wire exactly 150,000 to the bank, paying off the loan in Delia's name. Then you transfer the remaining balance of the 2 million back to my syndicate's account." Brandon's fingers shook violently as he typed, scrambling through the banking portals. "It's done! It's done, see?" he sobbed, turning the screen. "The debt is clear. Delia is free. You have your money back. We're square, right?" Marco glanced at the screen, confirming the transfers, and nodded to Enzo, who shut the laptop and stepped back. "Delia's debt is cleared," Marco agreed, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "But you see, Brandon, the money was only a small part of the problem. The real issue is the disrespect. You humiliated a woman I value. You insulted her body, her mind, her trust." "I'll apologize to her. I'll tell her she's beautiful," Brandon shrieked, crawling backward as the enforcers closed the circle. "She doesn't need your apologies because she already knows she's beautiful," Marco said coldly, turning his back and walking toward the idling Maybach. "She doesn't need to hear another word from you. Ever." "Wait, you said we were square," Brandon screamed, scrambling up before Enzo planted a boot in his chest, pinning him. Marco paused at the car door, looking back over his shoulder, moonlight catching the unforgiving edge of his profile. "I said Delia's debt was cleared. I never said you were forgiven. Enzo, make sure he understands the exact price of stealing from the Ferraro family." As the warehouse door slammed shut behind the Maybach, cutting off Brandon's final screams, Marco loosened his tie. The toll had been collected. Now he had to return to the penthouse and face the one woman who had the power to make the king of the Chicago underworld completely lose his mind. Sleep eluded Delia entirely. She paced the moonlit penthouse, bare feet sinking into plush rugs, the silence maddening. Marco had been gone 2 hours. 2 hours since Brandon's call. Unable to stand the suspense, she'd retrieved her phone. Sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, she opened a browser and typed one name: Ferraro Family Chicago. The results loaded instantly, and her breath hitched. Rows of news articles, federal press releases, investigative pieces flooded her screen. The Ferraro Syndicate, Chicago's untouchable crime family. Marco Ferraro, the ruthless heir to an underworld empire. She clicked the Images tab, hands shaking. There he was. Photos of Marco leaving courthouses unbothered, attending galas flanked by dangerous men, diagrams mapping his alleged control of the city's gambling and smuggling. the man who'd gently wiped her tears, who'd carried her sleeping body into his penthouse E, was a mafia boss, the most feared man in the Midwest. She dropped the phone onto the glass table like it had burned her. Panic rose in her chest. She was locked in the penthouse of a mobster. Brandon hadn't just stolen from loan sharks. He'd stolen from a man who commanded a literal army. And now she was sitting in that man's living room, wearing his shirt. The quiet hum of the private elevator shattered the silence. Delia leapt up, retreating behind the sofa, her heart pounding. Marco stepped in, shrugging off his charcoal overcoat. He looked impeccably composed. Not a hair out of place, but a dark, dangerous energy lingered, a heavy scent of cold wind and something metallic. His sharp eyes found her cowering behind the furniture and didn't miss the glowing phone on the table. "You're awake," he noted softly, unbuttoning his cuffs. "You're Marco Ferraro," Delia blurted, voice trembling, clutching the shirt around her waist. "You're the head of the Mafia, the syndicate, whatever they call it." Marco didn't deny it. He didn't flinch. He walked to the wet bar, poured a glass of whiskey, and turned to face her. "I am. And judging by the terror on your face, I assume you've spent the last hour reading the garbage the papers print about me." "Is it garbage?" Delia challenged, tears springing up. "Brandon called you. He was terrified. He said your family was going to kill him. Did you hurt him?" Marco took a slow sip, his eyes locking onto hers with hypnotic intensity. "Brandon Cole is no longer a problem. He officially wired the full amount to the bank. The loan in your name is entirely paid off, Delia. You are free of your debt. You will never see or hear from him again." Delia gasped, hands flying to cover her mouth. The crushing weight that had been destroying her life for months was suddenly, miraculously gone. But the relief was instantly overshadowed by how it had been accomplished. "What did you do to him, Marco? You killed him, didn't you?" "I secured your financial freedom," Marco corrected, setting his glass down, slowly crossing the room. Delia stepped back, but her back hit the floor-to-ceiling window. Trapped. "What happens to men who steal from my family is not your concern. Your concern is that you're safe, your credit is restored, and the man who broke your heart has paid for his sins." He stopped inches from her, his towering frame eclipsing her vision. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating, a dangerous magnetic pull. She should be terrified. She should be screaming for the police. But looking up into his eyes, she didn't see a cold-blooded killer. She saw a fierce, unyielding protector. "Why?" Delia whispered, tears spilling down her flushed cheeks. "Why would you do all this for me? I'm nobody. I'm just a broken accountant who was stupid enough to get conned. You could have any supermodel in this city. Why do you care what happens to me?" Marco's jaw clenched. He reached out, his large, warm hands gripping her hips, entirely unbothered by her size. In fact, his fingers pressed possessively into her soft curves, holding her in place. "Stop insulting yourself," he commanded, his voice a low, rough growl that sent shivers to her core. "Stop echoing the words of a dead man. You think I want a starving, hollow socialite? I look at you, Delia, and I see a woman with a brilliant mind, a beautiful, lush body, and a heart so full of loyalty it blinded you." Delia sobbed, shaking her head, trying to deny the intoxicating validation he poured over her battered self-esteem. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Marco countered fiercely, leaning down until his forehead rested against hers. "I know that when you walked into that bar, completely shattered, you eclipsed every other person in the room. I know I've spent my entire life building an empire of violence, and the only thing I want to use it for right now is to build a fortress around you." He dragged his thumb slowly across her lower lip. "You aren't a hostage here, Delia. The door is unlocked. Your debt is cleared. You can walk out right now and go back to your quiet, safe life. I won't stop you." He paused, his breath ghosting over her lips, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "But I'm a very selfish man, and I'm asking you to stay." Delia stood frozen against the cold glass, the Chicago skyline blurring behind her. Marco's plea hung in the quiet penthouse. He was a monster to the outside world, a man who dealt in violence and blood. Yet here he was, stripping away every ounce of his armor just to ask her to stay. She looked down at his hands, resting reverently on her hips. For the first time in her 28 years, a man wasn't asking her to shrink, to diet, to change. He was begging her to remain exactly as she was. "You're a dangerous man," she whispered, her breath catching as his thumbs stroked the soft curves of her waist. "Only to those who try to hurt you," Marco murmured, his slate-grey eyes burning with unwavering devotion. "To you, Delia, I'm whatever you need me to be, a shield, a weapon, a partner." The last word shattered the final remnants of her hesitation. Delia reached up, her fingers tangling into the collar of his shirt, and pulled him down, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was explosive, a desperate collision of two entirely different worlds. Marco groaned, a deep sound of pure victory, his arms wrapping fully around her lush figure, lifting her slightly off the ground. He kissed her with the same ruthless precision he used to rule the underworld, possessive, overwhelming, consuming. And Delia didn't pull away. She melted into his heat, finally letting the broken, insecure auditor die, and letting the woman Marco saw in her take her first breath. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel was a dazzling sea of glittering chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the absolute elite of Chicago society. The annual Winter Charity Gala was the most exclusive event of the season, where billionaires, politicians, and socialites gathered to parade their wealth. And Delia stood near a towering ice sculpture, holding court. She was no longer the crying, desperate woman drowning her sorrows in a dive bar. She wore a custom emerald gown that hugged every plus-size curve with unapologetic glamour, a diamond necklace resting against her collarbone, a breathtaking testament to the man watching her a few feet away with predatory pride. "Delia Hart, is that you?" She turned gracefully, a manicured hand resting on her hip. Standing before her was Roland Pierce, a senior partner at her old firm, her former boss. Roland was a notoriously cruel man who'd spent years passing her over for promotions, making subtle, degrading comments about her weight and her corporate image. I hardly recognized you," Roland stammered, eyes bulging as he took in her stunning appearance, the aura of power, the staggering wealth around her neck. "You left so abruptly. We heard rumors you had some kind of financial meltdown. Yet here you are at a $10,000 a plate dinner." He sneered, unable to help himself. "Who'd you have to call to get an invitation, Delia? Or did you finally find a sugar daddy willing to overlook your proportions?" Before Delia could respond, the temperature in the ballroom seemed to plummet. The hum of conversation nearby abruptly ceased as the crowd parted, instinctively making way for the apex predator entering their orbit. Marco slid his arm possessively around Delia's waist, pulling her softly against his tuxedo. "Is there a problem here, amore?" he asked, his voice a smooth, lethal purr. Roland froze, color draining from his face as he recognized the man holding Delia. The Ferraro boss was an urban legend that terrified even the most corrupt executives. "No problem, Marco," Delia replied, her voice steady and dripping with newfound icy confidence. She looked Roland dead in the eye, feeling no fear at all. "Roland was just leaving. Weren't you, Roland?" Mr. Ferraro," Roland choked out, sweat beading on his forehead. "I meant no disrespect. I was just checking in on a former employee." "Delia doesn't work for you anymore," Marco stated coldly, his grey eyes locking onto the trembling partner. "In fact, she recently acquired the majority stake in the commercial real estate firm that owns your corporate headquarters. If I ever hear that you spoke to my fiancé with anything less than absolute reverence, I'll have your firm evicted onto the street by morning, and then I'll make things truly unpleasant for you." Roland didn't say another word. He practically scrambled backward, fleeing the ballroom as fast as his legs could carry him. Delia looked up at Marco, a radiant, triumphant smile spreading across her face. He hadn't fought her battle for her. He'd simply stood beside her, reminding the world of the power she now wielded. She reached up, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "Did you really buy my old office building?" she whispered, eyes dancing. "I bought the entire block," Marco corrected smoothly, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her full lips. "I told you, Delia, I'm a man who solves problems, and my favorite problem to solve is anyone who thinks you're anything less than a queen." Delia leaned her head against his chest, the steady, comforting rhythm of his heartbeat grounding her. She had lost her savings, her career, and her naive innocence to a con artist. But in the ashes of her ruin, she'd found a dark, dangerous sanctuary. She was a Mafia boss's greatest weakness, his ultimate obsession, and she had never felt more beautiful. So here's the truth worth taking from all this. Heartbreak and betrayal pushed Delia to the very edge. But sometimes our darkest moments lead us to exactly the place we were always meant to be. She spent years believing her size and her trusting heart were her biggest flaws, when they turned out to be the very reasons a ruthless king of the underworld decided she was worthy of his entire empire. True love has a way of hiding in the most dangerous, unexpected shadows, waiting to build a fortress around you. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Delia made the right choice staying with Marco, walking into that dangerous world with her eyes wide open, or would you have taken your cleared debt and run? Drop your answer in the comments, because I read every single one. If you loved this twisted, thrilling Mafia romance, do me a favor and hit that like button. Share this story with a friend who loves a dark romance, and subscribe so you never miss the next intense story. I'll see you in the next one.